Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Supreme Harry, presenting to you today. Harry fainted during inheritance test and found out he owned 18 noble houses and was Britain's hidden king. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Floor of Gringotts. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, buried under a gas bill and a supermarket circular, which was how important things always seemed to arrive at number 4, Privet Drive, without ceremony, without warning, slipped in between the mundane like a knife between ribs. Harry found it when he came downstairs at 6:30 in the morning to start breakfast before anyone else was awake, because that was the summer routine, the one that had reasserted itself the moment he'd stepped off the Hogwarts Express and back into the Dursleys' particular atmosphere of controlled resentment. He sorted the post the way he always did, Vernon's, Petunia's, junk, and nearly put the Gringotts envelope in the junk pile before the weight of it registered. It was heavier than paper had a right to be. The envelope was cream-colored and thick, sealed with a wax stamp that bore the Gringotts crest, and his name on the front had been written in an ink that was a very dark brown and looked, unpleasantly, like it might not be entirely ink. He set it on the counter and started the bacon and read the letter standing up, one eye on the pan. Mr. H. J. Potter, it began, in script that looked carved rather than written, each letter pressed into the page with the kind of force that suggested whoever had written it did not consider penmanship a delicate art. You are hereby requested to attend Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, London, on the 15th of July, for the purpose of completing a standard inheritance assessment, as required under the Wizarding Succession Act of 1793. Failure to attend within 30 days of this notice will result in the temporary administration of all Potter holdings by the bank. Please bring this letter and proof of identity. No appointment is necessary. A senior assessor will be available throughout the banking day. Iron Forge, Senior Assessor, Department of Bloodline and Succession, Gringotts Bank, London. Harry read it twice, then flipped it over to check the back, which was blank, then set it down and turned the bacon before it burned and stared at the wall above the hob for a moment. All Potter holdings. He'd seen his vault. He'd been in it 5 times now, and each time there had been the same heap of gold galleons that felt, to someone who'd spent his formative years sleeping under a staircase, like an amount of money so large it stopped being real. He'd always assumed that was it, the whole of what his parents had left him, reduced to a pile of coins in an underground chamber. The word holdings implied something else entirely. Holdings was a word that belonged to people with land. People with property. People with things attached to their names that went beyond a school trunk and a photo album. He ate breakfast after the Dursleys came down, which meant he didn't eat much, and spent the rest of the day thinking about it. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. Ron and Hermione got regular owls, but those had lately taken on a careful, ministry-approved quality that made Harry feel like he was writing letters to be reviewed rather than letters to be read, and besides, this felt like something he needed to see for himself before he put words around it. He went to bed that night and lay awake listening to the neighbor's television through the wall and thought about his mother's eyes in the mirror of Erist, and about a vault full of gold that might not be the whole story, and eventually fell asleep sometime after 2. He was on the night bus by 9 the next morning. The night bus deposited him on Charing Cross Road with its usual combination of aggression and casual indifference to the laws of physics, and Stan Shunpike said, "Have a nice day," in the tone of someone who had given up on nice days personally but still believed in them for others, and Harry straightened his jacket and walked through the pub and into Diagon Alley. It was a weekday morning in mid-July, which meant the alley was moderately busy with the kind of people who had errands to run and no particular interest in being interesting about them. A witch with a large wheeled basket navigating the cobblestones. A pair of older wizards arguing outside the apothecary with the comfortable energy of people who'd been arguing about the same thing for 40 years. 2 small children dragging a harassed-looking man toward quality Quidditch supplies. Harry walked past all of it and up the steps of Gringotts with his key in one hand and the letter in the other. The goblin guards at the door looked at him, looked at each other, and did nothing, which was normal. Inside, the vast marble interior echoed with the usual bank sounds, the scratch of quills, the clink of coins, the distant rumble from somewhere underground that was either the cart system or the dragons, and Harry had always thought it was probably both. He joined the nearest queue. He was third from the front when a goblin appeared at his elbow, not from any queue or teller station, but from a door in the wall that Harry hadn't noticed, set between two large tapestries depicting what appeared to be significant moments in goblin financial history. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. His name, on a small brass plate pinned to his jacket, was Ironforge. He was older than most goblins Harry had interacted with. There was a quality of age in his face that was less about wrinkles and more about depth, the way very old stone had depth, and his eyes were a dark amber that caught the light and held it. "We have been expecting you. Please follow me." Harry stepped out of the queue. The witch behind him sighed. Harry followed Ironforge through the door in the wall. The corridor beyond was lit with the same greenish-gold sconce light as the main hall but was narrower, and the ceiling was lower, and the stone underfoot was older, the kind of old that you could feel through your shoes, the way you could feel age in churches. They walked for perhaps 2 minutes, past several doors, before Ironforge stopped at one that looked exactly like all the others and opened it. The room inside was circular and domed. The walls were a smooth, dark stone that caught reflected light in ways the marble of the main hall didn't, and the ceiling was painted, no, carved, with constellations Harry didn't recognize. Not the standard ones. Something older, or something from a different mapping of the sky entirely. In the center of the room was a stone table, and on the table was a basin carved from something black and glossy, roughly the size of a washbowl, filled with what appeared to be water. Harry knew immediately, with the bone-deep instinct that 6 years of magical education had developed in him, that whatever was in that basin was not water. 2 other goblins stood at opposite sides of the room. A third, seated in a high-backed chair at the far end, was the oldest thing in the room that was capable of moving under its own power. Ancient in the way that suggested a significant portion of the history Harry had read in his first year had been lived through firsthand. "Please sit, Mr. Potter," Ironforge said. Harry sat. The chair on his side of the table was plain and functional, stone like everything else. "This is the inheritance assessment basin," Ironforge said, moving to stand at the table's edge. "The process is straightforward. You will place your right hand in the water. I will take a single drop of blood." He produced a small silver needle with the casual efficiency of someone producing a pen, "and the basin will read your bloodline and generate a full accounting of all holdings, titles, and properties to which you are the rightful heir. The process takes approximately 10 minutes. It is painless." "All right," Harry said. He looked at the basin. The liquid surface was absolutely still. No reflections. Not even his own, which he found unsettling in a way he couldn't immediately articulate. "Standard procedure," he said. "Standard procedure," Ironforge confirmed. "And the witnesses?" Harry looked at the 3 other goblins. "Also standard?" Ironforge's composure didn't break, not exactly. It was something much smaller, a fractional pause, a micro-adjustment in the set of his shoulders that told Harry, in the language of every carefully controlled person he'd ever dealt with, that the answer to this question was more complicated than the answer he was about to give. "Standard," Ironforge said. "For assessments involving senior houses." It wasn't a lie, Harry thought. It just wasn't the whole thing. He put his hand in the basin. The liquid was neither warm nor cold. It was the temperature of the room, the temperature of nothing, of the absence of temperature, which was its own distinct sensation. The needle was quick. A small point of pain at the pad of his index finger. A single dark drop falling from his fingertip into the surface of the liquid. And spreading. It spread the way blood always spread in water, except that after a second, something changed in the motion. The spreading stopped. The threads of dark in the liquid went still. Then they reversed. They pulled back, gathered, and then, with purpose, with the deliberate quality of something that had been waiting, began to form something. Not dispersing outward the way blood dissolved in water but building inward, concentrating, branching into a structure that looked like a tree seen from above. Root and branch and sub-branch, multiplying with a speed and intricacy that made Harry's eyes want to track it and fail, too many simultaneous movements. Ironforge said nothing. The liquid turned gold. Not a shift in color, not a warming of tone. Gold, actual luminous gold, the deep warm light of it filling the basin and rising, casting light up on the domed ceiling and the carved constellations and the faces of the 4 goblins in the room, all of whom had gone very still. The tree of light in the basin grew. Main branches, Harry counted them without meaning to, the way you counted things when the number was important, 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 18. 18 primary branches, each of them sprouting their own structure, and all of it luminous and pulsing with something that felt like a heartbeat, steady and deep and entirely wrong for an object sitting on a stone table. The ancient goblin in the high-backed chair stood up. Harry watched him stand and thought, that almost never happens. One of the other goblins said something in gobbledygook, short and sharp, and Ironforge replied without looking away from the basin. His voice was controlled. Very controlled. The kind of controlled that took practice. Harry kept his hand in the liquid, though the instruction had been to leave it there until told otherwise, and watched the light. There was something pulling at him from it. Not physically. Not even magically, exactly, it was more fundamental than that, more like recognition. Like looking at something you've never seen before and knowing, in your body rather than your mind, that you've always known it. Then the feeling intensified. Harry had felt the presence of powerful magic before. He'd stood in rooms with Dumbledore and felt the weight of his magic like a change in air pressure. He'd been in the presence of Voldemort twice and felt the particular cold density of magic that had been warped by decades of dark practice. He knew what powerful magic felt like from the outside, which is to say, it felt like weather. Like something happening to the air around a person. What he felt now was different, because it wasn't outside him. It was him. It was below him, or through him, or it had always been underneath everything else and he'd just never been able to feel it because somewhere between that and now someone had put a hand over it and held it down. The first seal went with a sound like a crack in ice, not loud, not dramatic, just the definitive sound of a thing giving way under pressure it could no longer hold. Harry felt it go in his chest, somewhere behind his sternum, like a breath he'd been holding without knowing releasing. The second went immediately after, and the third was barely a second behind. 4 and 5 broke together. The sixth lasted 3 seconds more, as if making a point, and then it went 2, and the sound it made was not a crack but a tone, a single clear bell note that rang out in the circular room and kept ringing, diminishing so slowly it was still audible half a minute later. What followed was not pain and not pleasure and was not easy to put into any category Harry had language for. The closest he could come, later, trying to explain it to Sirius, was this: imagine you've been breathing recycled air your whole life, air processed through some filter that removed something essential from it, and you never knew because you had no comparison. And then someone takes the filter away. He became aware that he was on the floor only because the floor was pressed against his cheek and it was cold. He had no memory of falling. The stone was cool and smooth and the gold light from the basin, which had increased exponentially when the seals broke, was visible even with his eyes closed, it pressed through his eyelids like sunlight. There were goblins moving. Voices in gobbledygook, rapid and urgent. A light was being passed over him by someone, he could sense it through the warmth it produced. Ironforge said something in English, keep him still, and someone's hands, small and strong, adjusted his position on the floor. He didn't feel bad. That was the strange part. He felt dispersed, like his sense of himself had expanded past its usual edges and hadn't quite found the new boundary yet. But there was nothing in the feeling that was wrong. It was the opposite of wrong. It was the feeling of something that had been wrong for a long time becoming, suddenly, right. He passed out the rest of the way. When he came back, the ceiling was still the carved dome, the constellations still unnamed. Good. He hadn't moved. He was on a cot that had appeared from somewhere, and a goblin healer was doing things to his left arm with a series of instruments that hummed at frequencies slightly below comfortable. Ironforge stood a short distance away with a scroll that had unrolled itself across the floor. It was long. It was very long. The gold ink on it was still faintly luminescent, casting a warm light on the stone beneath it. Harry sat up. The healer said, sharply, "Don't." "I'm fine," Harry said. "You are not fine." She said it without looking up from her instruments, which made it land differently than it would have if she'd been looking at him, less like an opinion and more like a diagnostic reading. 6 binding seals were removed from your magical core simultaneously. The equivalent physical analogy would be the sudden removal of a full-body restraint you've worn since infancy. Your nervous system needs time to recalibrate. Harry held still for approximately 4 more seconds, then swung his legs off the cot. The healer made a sound of profound professional displeasure. "Binding seals," Harry said. "Yes." Ironforge, still by the scroll, looked up. His amber eyes were doing something complicated. "Placed on you in November of 1981. They were layered with considerable skill, each one keyed to reseal itself if probed directly, which is why no previous standard examination has detected them." "Who placed them?" "The scroll will tell you more than I can at this moment," Ironforge said, which was a way of answering that told Harry quite a lot already. "But first, the assessment itself." Harry stood, steadied himself, not because he was unsteady, but because the feeling of having 60% more magic than you'd woken up with that morning took a moment to orient to, the way your eyes took a moment to adjust when you went from a dim room into sunlight, and walked to the scroll. It lay across several feet of floor, beginning at the heading, Potter, Harold James, Full Bloodline Assessment, July 15, 1996. Below the heading, in the same carved-looking script, were the Bloodline entries. Harry crouched down and read. House Potter, Lordship, held in direct patrilineal succession. Primary residence, Godric's Hollow, destroyed 1981. Secondary properties, Edinburgh, Townhouse, Lake District, Estate, Coastal Cornwall, 2 properties, 1 primary, 1 annexed. Vaults, substantial. Status, active, sole heir confirmed. House Black, Lordship, held in collateral succession via the designation of Sirius Orion Black III, current Lord Black. Harry's entry here was flagged as co-inheritor pending Lord Black, which meant Sirius's formal acknowledgement would make it fully his. Status, active, heir designated. He kept reading. House Peveril, Ancient Lordship. Primary property, unspecified, sealed location, Wales. Notes in the margin in a cramped secondary hand, associated with the 3 artifacts. Vaults, sealed, key at Gringotts. Status, active, sole heir. He turned his head slightly to see the next entry. House Gryffindor. Harry stopped. He looked at the words for a moment, at the clear, unambiguous text of it, the Gringotts script that had no room for qualification or misreading, and then he looked up at Ironforge. "My mother," he said. "She was Muggle-born." "She was not," Ironforge said. "Lily Evans was a squibline descendant of several old magical families. The magical gene, suppressed in her mother's generation, dormant in her grandmother's, re-expressed fully in her. This is relatively uncommon but not unprecedented. What is unprecedented is the specific combination of dormant lines that re-expressed simultaneously." He paused. The records identifying her true parentage, the Evans family's actual lineage, were altered in the Department of Mysteries registry sometime in the early 1970s. Before she began Hogwarts. "Altered," Harry said. "By whom?" Ironforge met his eyes and said nothing, which was its own answer. Harry turned back to the scroll and kept reading. House Ravenclaw. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Another founder. He was collecting them. House Hufflepuff. 3 founders of Hogwarts. 3. He was beginning to understand why the basin had gone gold. House Slytherin. Through the gaunt line. Here a small asterisk led to a footnote in that cramped secondary hand, common ancestor with T.M. Riddle, Voldemort, approximately 7 generations removed. Mr. Potter is senior heir. Riddle is not. Harry read the footnote 3 times, and the third time he started laughing, not the bright, uncontrolled laugh of something actually funny, but the kind that came out when the universe presented you with something so specifically absurd that laughter was the only structurally sound response. He was descended from Salazar Slytherin, and he was the Slytherin heir, in Voldemort, who had built his entire identity around purity and the Slytherin line, was junior to him in it. He stood up, stretched his back, and kept reading. House Emrys stopped him entirely. He stared at it. The entry was brief, briefer than the others, as though the scroll had rendered itself modest out of respect. House Emrys. Ancient beyond standard dating. Merlin's primary line, matrilineal descent through the Evans bloodline. Lordship and associated magical legacy currently dormant, activation expected with seal removal. Vaults, not applicable. Property, not applicable. Associated magical abilities, see secondary assessment. Merlin, Harry said, not to anyone in particular. Your maternal great-grandmother's line, Ironforge said. The goblin genealogical record on this one is very old. We have had it in our archives since the 13th century. We have been waiting for the right convergence. You've been waiting, Harry said. The House of Emrys does not pass frequently. When it does, we note it. Harry moved on. House Pendragon was below House Emrys, and Harry read it with the numbness of someone who has absorbed one staggering thing too many in quick succession and has simply run out of room for it. Pendragon. Arthur's line. The line of the once and future king of legend, apparently alive and well in the blood of a 16-year-old with broken glasses and a lightning bolt scar who'd eaten half a sandwich for breakfast. The remaining houses came after, 8 more, each ancient, each substantial. House Pruitt, which made him think of the Weasleys and their warm, crowded kitchen. House Selwyn. House Macmillan. 5 others he didn't immediately recognize but whose names he'd seen on the Wisengamot listings he'd half-read in one of Hermione's prep documents before 5th year. And at the bottom, separated by a heavier line, a single entry without vault or property listings, with only a title and a symbol, a crown, 8-pointed, each point ending in a different sigil, drawn in the heaviest gold ink on the scroll. The High Seat of Britain, ancient magical kingship. Dormant since October 31, 1709. Activation requires convergence of 5 or more noble house inheritances in a single living heir. Current convergence, 18 of 18 possible. Activation threshold exceeded by a factor of 3.6. And below that, active. Harry stood on the floor of Gringotts with the gold light of the basin behind him and the scroll of his entire inheritance stretched at his feet, and read the word active and felt the world rearrange itself around a new axis. He didn't feel afraid. He checked for fear the way you pressed a bruise to see if it still hurt, and found something else in its place, something with more weight to it, more certainty. The feeling of a thing that had been true for a long time becoming visible. The ancient goblin spoke. Harry looked at him, at the oldest face in the room, in which something that was not quite emotion moved like weather over a mountain. The last holder of the high seat, the ancient goblin said, was Edmund Pendragon. He died on the 31st of October, 1709, and left no direct heirs. The seat became dormant. Those who followed, ministers, chief warlocks, every power structure built in the 287 years since, built their authority on the assumption that it would remain so. He looked at Harry with eyes that had been looking at the world for a very long time. The Goblin Nation recognized the high seat then. We recognize it now. Practically speaking, Harry said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected, what does the seat mean? What does it actually do, right now, today? In practical terms, Ironforge said, the Ministry of Magic was constituted in 1707, 2 years before Edmund Pendragon's death, under a charter that explicitly acknowledged the primacy of the High Seat over all other wizarding governmental structures. The charter was never repealed. It could not be repealed by any minister or Wisengamot majority, because neither body has the authority to alter the founding document of both. A pause. Cornelius Fudge's office derives its power from a chain that ends in your authority, Mr. Potter. The Waisengemot is, by the founding charter, an advisory council to the Crown. These facts have been irrelevant for nearly 3 centuries. They are not irrelevant now. Fudge, Harry said, is going to lose his mind. Yes. And Dumbledore, Harry stopped himself. Picked the thread back up differently. The seals. The 6 seals on my core. Who placed them? The room had a specific quality of silence. The magical signature on the seals, Ironforge said, is consistent with Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. This has been confirmed by 3 independent goblin assessors this morning. He held Harry's gaze. He placed them in November of 1981. You were 15 months old. Harry absorbed this the way you absorbed a physical blow, by letting it happen, by not tensing against it, by staying on your feet. The alteration to my mother's records, he said. Also him? We believe so. The agent used was someone in the Department of Mysteries, but the chain of authority trails to the same source. He knew, Harry said. He knew the seals were still there. For 15 years. The seals were designed for indefinite duration. They were not casual work. They required intent, preparation, and significant ongoing maintenance. Ironforge's voice was very flat, which was the goblin equivalent of visible fury. They were not something placed and then forgotten. Harry nodded slowly. He looked at the basin, at the gold light, still warm, still pulsing. He thought about a man with half-moon glasses and a long silver beard who'd looked at him with enormous, careful kindness for 6 years and never once mentioned that approximately 40% of Harry's own magic was under lock and key. He didn't feel betrayed. Not yet, there was too much happening for betrayal to find its full size. What he felt was something quieter and in some ways worse, he felt informed. He felt like someone who had been working without all the relevant facts and had just been handed them, and now had to decide what to do. What do I need to sign? He said. Ironforge nearly smiled. More than I can hand you all at once, he said. But first, is there someone you'd like to contact? The process will take several hours. You've had a significant morning. I fainted, Harry said. You fainted, Ironforge agreed. And had 6 core seals removed, and discovered an inheritance that is, the ancient goblin made a small sound that Harry was beginning to read as their version of laughter, considerable. Harry thought about who he wanted here. Not Dumbledore, that conversation needed to happen eventually and it needed to happen honestly and face to face, not with Harry sitting in a bank still raw from having just learned what he'd learned. Not the Weasleys, not yet. Arthur worked for the Ministry and would be in an impossible position. Not Hermione, who would want to process it all systematically and at length and he loved her for it but not right now. Sirius Black, he said. My legal guardian. Can you reach him through Gringotts Floo? He hesitated, because the safe house address was technically classified within the order. Tell him Harry needs him. He'll know the Floo point. We have private Floo access we can extend to Lord Black without routing through minister-monitored connections, Ironforge said smoothly, and Harry had a feeling that Gringotts had a working knowledge of where every significant person in magical Britain was at any given time and simply chose not to share it with the Ministry as a matter of professional policy. Good, Harry said. He sat back down in the stone chair while a junior goblin vanished to make the Floo call, and the healer reappeared with the look of someone who had accepted that her patient was going to be obstinate about resting and had shifted her professional focus accordingly, and Ironforge began arranging documents on the table with the systematic efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this particular moment for quite some time. The gold light from the basin pulsed steadily. The tree of light in it hadn't disappeared. It sat in the liquid like a lantern, 18 branches casting their own small light upward, and Harry watched it and thought about his mother, about who she actually was, the bloodlines she'd carried without knowing, the history that had been taken from both of them before it could pass naturally from one to the other. He thought about Godric Gryffindor and Salazar Slytherin and Merlin of all people sitting somewhere in his family tree like lodgers nobody had mentioned. He thought about a crown with 8 points and a word in heavy gold ink that said, active. He thought, I have been living as a fraction of myself. And then, not anymore. Sirius arrived in 19 minutes. He came through the private floor with the practiced speed of someone who'd entered a lot of rooms quickly and had learned to be fully alert before he was fully through the door, gray eyes scanning, body loose and ready, finding Harry and doing the rapid, practiced check that was the long habit of someone who had learned, over years and loss, not to assume that I'm fine and a message meant the person was actually fine. You look worse than fine, Sirius said. I look better than I did 30 minutes ago, Harry said. I was on the floor. You were on the floor, Sirius repeated. There was a basin. It was a whole thing. Harry handed him the scroll. Sirius unrolled it with both hands. Harry watched him read. It was, he discovered, extremely instructive, watching someone you knew well encounter the same information you just absorbed, seeing their reactions light up in real time like a map being revealed section by section. Sirius went still at House Gryffindor. His eyebrows went up at House Ravenclaw. At House Slytherin he made a short sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cough, something in between, and glanced up at Harry with an expression that was approximately half horrified and half delighted. You're the Slytherin heir, he said. Senior to Voldemort, Harry said. Apparently. Merlin, Sirius said, which under normal circumstances would have been an expression but in this context was him reading the next entry on the scroll and having a specific response to it. That one I had trouble with too, Harry said. Sirius read the rest in silence that deepened as he went, the humor in his expression gradually replaced by something more serious, more careful. At the final entry, the 8-pointed crown, the single word in heavy ink, he stopped. He read it twice. He looked up at Harry. Active, he said. Active, Harry confirmed. Sirius was quiet for a full 10 seconds, which for Sirius was approximately the equivalent of a full minute of anyone else's contemplative silence. He was looking at Harry with an expression that had moved past surprise into something more complex, something that was trying to reconcile the James Potter's son who'd been living at the Dursleys and fainting in Gringotts with the text of what was on this scroll. The High Seat, Sirius said slowly. Harry, you understand that's not a title like Lord something or other. That is not even like Chief Warlock. That is, the thing that all of it answers to, Harry said. Yes. Fudge is going to lose his actual mind. That seems like his problem. Sirius looked at him steadily for a moment. Then, quietly, with the particular quality of attention he reserved for the things that actually mattered, and Dumbledore. Harry met his eyes. The seals on my core. 6 of them, placed in November 1981. He let that sit a moment. His signature. The expression that crossed Sirius's face then was not simple. Anger was in it, the fast, hot kind, but underneath that was something older and more complicated, the expression of a man who had spent 12 years in Azkaban believing that a friend had betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort, who had been proved wrong, who had come out the other side with his faith in people reassembled from fragments and who was not particularly inclined to watch it get disassembled again. He kept them in place, Sirius said. Not a question. Working it through out loud. For 15 years. They were designed for indefinite duration. Maintenance required. He knew they were there. Sirius set the scroll down on the table. Carefully. With the deliberate movements of someone managing something they'd rather throw. I want to hear his reasons, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. Before I decide what to do about it, Harry said. I want to hear them from him, in person, where he can't manage the conversation. I'm going to ask him directly and I'm going to watch him answer and then I'm going to decide. He paused. But that's a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight there are documents to sign. Sirius was quiet for another moment. Then something shifted in his face. The anger didn't go away but it made room for something else, something that was, Harry thought, a kind of recognition. The recognition of a man seeing someone he'd worried about and watched over becoming something he'd hoped they might. Right, Sirius said. What do you need? Someone who knows succession law. Not Dumbledore, not the Ministry. Someone who's on my side because they want to be. Augusta Longbottom, Sirius said, without hesitation. She's the most knowledgeable person alive on the old noble house system. She has no patience for either Fudge or Dumbledore, and she's been waiting for someone to shake this country's political structure for 30 years. He paused. She'll also be absolutely insufferable about it and remind everyone that she saw it coming, but that's a manageable price. Owl her, Harry said. Tell her I need to meet. He thought for a moment. Tell her it's about the Wizengamot. She'll be here by tomorrow morning. Good. Harry turned back to Ironforge. And the question of how this information gets out, you said you can't suppress it indefinitely. The formal notification to the Wizengamot of an active high seat is a legal requirement under the same 1793 Act that mandated this assessment, Ironforge said. We will send it within 48 hours. At that point every member of the Wizengamot knows before the general public does, Harry said, and whoever gets there first shapes how the public finds out. Fudge will be in that meeting. He'll have his version ready before I've said a word. Yes, Ironforge said. Harry thought about this. He thought about the previous year, about the Daily Prophet running story after story calling him unstable, delusional, attention-seeking, while he'd had no platform and no recourse and nothing to do but endure it. He thought about how a story told once, loudly and confidently, became very difficult to dislodge once it had set. Sirius, he said. Read a Skeeter. Sirius opened his mouth. I know, Harry said. I know. But Hermione has her. She's been sitting on that story for almost a year. Skeeter will write exactly what we give her, because the alternative is Hermione releasing what she knows and Skeeter's career ends. Harry kept his voice level and practical. She reaches everyone. She's fast. And if we give her the story tonight, it's in print before the Wizengamot gets their notification and Fudge gets his spin session. Sirius considered this with the expression of someone who disapproves of a plan on principle but cannot find a specific flaw in the logic. Fine, he said. But you read it before it goes anywhere. Obviously. Harry looked at Ironforge. When does the Wizengamot notification go out? We are required to send it within 48 hours of a confirmed assessment result, Ironforge said. We are not, however, required to send it immediately. So we have tonight and tomorrow morning. Effectively. Harry nodded. He turned to the table, where the first of Ironforge's document stacks had been laid out in a neat sequence. Let's start the signings. Walk me through what I'm signing and why, and don't abbreviate it, I want to understand each one. Ironforge looked at him with an expression that was, unambiguously, approval. Of course, my lord, he said. Harry let that settle for a moment, the first time the address had been used, the first time that specific word had been applied to him in earnest and not sarcastically. My lord. He didn't flinch at it. He didn't correct it. He let it stand, let it mean what it meant, and turned to the first document. They worked through the afternoon. The healer reappeared periodically to check on him and was increasingly satisfied by what she found, though she maintained a professional dignity about it. Ironforge walked Harry through each lordship acceptance with precise, contextual explanations, the nature of the house, its historical political weight, its current holdings and their condition, the specific oaths required for acceptance. The oaths took time. Each one required channeling magic through an oath stone, and Harry did this with an ease that increased as the afternoon went on, as his recalibrated magic settled further into its natural capacity, and by the fourth or fifth oath he was handling it with a confidence that felt like remembering rather than learning. Sirius sat through most of it, asking sharp and useful questions about the political implications of specific house alignments that told Harry his godfather knew considerably more about the old wizarding nobility than he'd ever let on. Sirius Black had grown up in the heart of that world, had rejected it, but rejecting something and forgetting it were different things. The ancient goblin, whose name Harry eventually learned was Ragnarok IV, a name that carried, based on Ironforge's deferential posture whenever it was mentioned, significant weight in goblin history, spoke occasionally, in measured sentences that tended to be more important than their brevity suggested. He told Harry, toward the end of the afternoon, that the activation of the high seat would produce a physical change in the ancestral magic of every house Harry now held, the wards on properties, the magical protections on vaults, the ancient enchantments bound into land and stone across Britain. They would recognize him. They would, to the extent that magical objects and enchantments could be said to do anything, orient themselves toward him. You'll feel it when it happens, Ragnarok said. Each one is different. Some will be quiet. Some will not. Harry signed the last document as the light through the room's small, high window had shifted from gold to blue. Ironforge rolled the acceptance record with the precision of someone handling something he expected to reference many times. The formal process is complete, he said. Congratulations, Lord Potter. And here the almost smile appeared for the third time, which Harry was beginning to realize was Ironforge's equivalent of open delight, as the high seat requires a different address, Your Majesty. The words landed in the room with an extraordinary weight. Sirius made a sound. Harry looked at Ironforge steadily. Lord Potter is fine for now, he said. Until I decide how I want to handle the public-facing aspect of this. Of course. Harry stood, stretched, and picked up his copy of the full assessment scroll. The gold ink had settled from luminescent to a warm, steady amber that was somehow more readable than the bright version had been. He and Sirius walked out through the corridor and through the main hall and out the bronze doors into the evening air of Diagon Alley. The alley was quiet at this hour. A few last stragglers, shops beginning to close, the lamplights coming on in the blue dusk. The cobblestones were warm from the day's sun and the air smelled like summer and old magic and something sweet from the ice cream parlor 3 doors down. Harry stood on the top step of Gringotts and looked out at it. Somewhere out there, in a cottage in Godforgetware, Dumbledore was probably reading the first notification of the completed assessment that Ironforge had sent as a courtesy, not the Wisengamot one, not yet, but the Standard Bank confirmation of assessment completed. He'd know something significant had happened. He wouldn't know what, not yet. Not the full scope. Tomorrow, Harry would go to him. Come on, Sirius said from beside him. We need to find Rita Skeeter, and I need to eat something, and you need to sleep more than 4 hours for the first time since June. How did you know I was sleeping 4 hours? Because you're 16 and you look like you've been awake since last year. Also Molly told me she was worried. Harry came down the steps. His magic moved through him, full and unconstrained and entirely his, and the feeling of it was like weather, like the pressure before a storm, charged and enormous and alive. One more thing, he said. What? Send the owl to Augusta Longbottom tonight. I want her at the meeting tomorrow, before I see Dumbledore. I want to understand the full legal position before I walk into that room. Sirius looked at him in the lamplight with the same expression he'd had in the meeting room, that specific, evaluating, quietly moved expression that Harry was beginning to understand was what Sirius looked like when something was going right after a very long period of things going wrong. All right, he said simply. They walked toward the leaky cauldron and the evening deepened around them, and Harry thought about 18 houses and a dormant kingship and a door that had been held shut for 15 years finally standing open. He walked through it. Chapter 2, 18 seats. The leaky cauldron at 9 in the evening had a specific energy, not rowdy, not quiet, somewhere in the middle, the comfortable noise of people who had finished their day and weren't ready to end it yet. Tom the barman moved behind the counter with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing this particular job since before most of his customers were born, and the fire in the hearth threw light across the low ceiling and the scarred wooden tables and the collection of witches and wizards who were, collectively, absolutely none of Harry's business. Harry sat in a corner booth with his back to the wall, a habit picked up somewhere in the last 2 years, the instinct to keep the room visible, and ate a proper meal for the first time in what felt like weeks. Sirius sat across from him and did the same, and for a while neither of them said very much, because they were both, in their different ways, still absorbing the afternoon. The food helped. Harry ate a full plate of shepherd's pie and half of a second one, and drank 2 glasses of pumpkin juice and then switched to water, and felt the particular clarity that came with being actually fed beginning to establish itself. "Rita Skeeter," Sirius said eventually, setting his fork down. "I'm going to need a drink before that conversation." "You've had 2, Harry pointed out. "I'm going to need a third, then." Sirius signaled Tom. "You're sure about this?" "Her specifically. She's the most read journalist in Wizarding Britain and she'll write exactly what we give her," Harry said. "I'm not doing this because I like her. I'm doing it because she's the right tool for this particular job. She's going to want a scoop. Something she can put her name to that isn't just us handing her a press release. We can give her that. The story is extraordinary on its own merits. She doesn't need to invent anything." Harry thought for a moment. "The angle is this, not minister's authority threatened by teenager, not boy who lived secret past. The angle is ancient magic, long dormant, finds its heir. Make it sound like something that was always going to happen. Something the magical world should be proud of. You want it to sound inevitable rather than revolutionary," Sirius said. "Revolutionary threatens people. Inevitable reassures them." Harry leaned forward slightly. "If Fudge's reaction is the first thing the public hears, the story becomes about whether I'm dangerous and what he's going to do about it. If my story comes out first, framed properly, then his reaction looks like a man fighting against history. And nobody roots for that man." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. 15 months in Azkaban waiting for a trial that never came," he said, "and I never once thought that way." "You had other things to think about." "I had 12 years, Harry. You'd think I'd have worked something out." But he didn't say it bitterly. He said it the way he said most things that referenced Azkaban, with a specific, practiced lightness that sat over something heavier and didn't quite cover it but wasn't asking for you to notice the gap. "All right. I can have her here by 11 tonight. She lives in London, Hermione has her address, and Hermione will absolutely owl her and tell her to come when I explain what it's about. Hermione can't know the full scope of it yet. I'll just say it's large. She'll understand large." Harry nodded. "I want to read whatever Skeeter writes before it goes to the prophet. Every word. Non-negotiable." "Agreed." Sirius stood, already patting his pockets for parchment. "I'll write to Hermione and to Augusta both. Back in 10 minutes. He disappeared in the direction of the public owl post that Tom kept in the back corridor, and Harry sat alone in the booth with the remains of his meal and the comfortable noise of the pub around him and let himself think. Augusta Longbottom. He'd met her once properly, at King's Cross, picking up Neville, and the impression had been of a woman built like a watchtower. Short in stature, immense in presence, wearing a hat with a stuffed vulture on it that somehow communicated authority rather than eccentricity. Neville was terrified of her and loved her at the same time, which was the combination that meant someone was genuinely important to you. She was a Wisengamot member in her own right. She knew the old laws the way a mason knew stone. Dumbledore. Harry let that sit in his mind, the way you let a wound sit once you'd cleaned it, not to dwell, but to assess. 6 seals. 15 years. His mother's records altered. All of it managed by the same careful hands that had guided him through 6 years of Hogwarts with such quiet assurance, such absolute certainty about what Harry needed and what Harry should do and what the greater good required. He wasn't going to that meeting tomorrow in anger. Anger was a variable that complicated conversations and gave the other person something to respond to instead of the thing you actually needed them to answer. He was going to it with questions, and he was going to watch the man's face while he answered them, and he was going to make the decision about what came next based on what he heard. But whatever Dumbledore said, whatever the reasons were, however good or well-intentioned, however much they made sense in the context of a war that had been happening before Harry was born, there was going to be an accounting. Harry was certain of this not with anger but with the flat, clear certainty of someone who has looked at a list of facts and arrived at a conclusion. His magic shifted in him, very slightly, like something adjusting to a new weight. He'd been noticing it all afternoon, the way it moved differently now, the way it responded to his thoughts with a readiness that the sealed version never had. In the middle of the sixth lordship oath, he'd channeled enough magic through the Selwyn oath stone that Iron Forge had quietly suggested he ease back, and the ease of it had been the surprising part. Not the power but the ease. Like the difference between lifting something with both hands instead of one. 3 secondary abilities, the healer had said. Blood magic recognition. Ward sense. Lordship magic. He was already noticing the second one. It had started on the walk from Gringotts to the leaky cauldron, a faint peripheral awareness of the magical structures around him, the way you became aware of sound in a room after someone points out it was there all along. The wards on the leaky cauldron were visible to him now in a way they hadn't been an hour ago, not visually but as a kind of structural presence, the way you felt the load-bearing walls of a building even if you couldn't see them. Old wards. Solid. Several layers, the outermost ones placed recently, within the last year, he thought, though he had no reference point yet for what that estimate was based on. Interesting. He filed it away. There was a great deal to file away. Sirius came back from the owl post looking satisfied in a way that meant he'd written letters that were going to make other people's evenings considerably more eventful. He sat back down, accepted the third drink that Tom had placed on the table in his absence, and said, "Rita will be here at 10:30. Hermione is going to owl her with the word enormous, and Rita Skeeter is constitutionally incapable of resisting an enormous story. Augusta Longbottom will be here at 8 tomorrow morning." 8 tomorrow morning, Harry repeated. "She goes to bed at 9 and wakes at 5:30, Sirius said. "She considers people who sleep past 6 morally flexible." Great. She also said, and I'm quoting the dictated reply Hermione transcribed because Augusta Longbottom cannot send an owl without dictating her responses to an intermediary, "Tell Lord Black that if this concerns what I think it concerns, I will be there, and he should ensure young Potter has eaten breakfast." How does she know what it concerns? Augusta Longbottom has been in the Wisingamot for 43 years, Sirius said. I suspect she knows what most things concern before she's been told. Rita Skeeter arrived at 10:32, which told Harry she'd left the moment Hermione's owl arrived and had taken 15 minutes to do something to her hair and makeup before coming, because there was no other explanation for the gap. She came through the back entrance of the leaky cauldron, the Diagon Alley side, in a set of robes that were acid green even in the firelight, her blonde curls architectural, her smile the professional variety that had nothing behind it except assessment. She clocked Harry immediately. The smile shifted, became something more careful, more real, stripped of its performance layer. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Sit down," Harry said pleasantly. She sat, which was faster compliance than her normal register allowed for, and he understood from this that Hermione's word enormous had done its work. "I have a story for you," Harry said. "When it's published, which will be tomorrow morning's edition if you work tonight, it will be the most significant piece of journalism in Wizarding Britain in 3 decades. Possibly longer." He paused. "You'll have exclusive rights to the initial story. Full byline. First print." Rita's eyes went sharp. "In exchange for?" "You write what I tell you." "Exactly what I tell you. No additions, no flourishes, no anonymous sources that you fabricate to add texture, and no follow-up speculation pieces for 1 week after initial publication." He held her gaze. "You know as well as I do that this arrangement is in your interest as much as mine." The reference to Hermione's information hung in the air between them, unstated, which was more effective than stating it. "What's the story?" Rita said. Harry told her. He told her everything that could be public, the inheritance assessment, the 18 houses, the bloodline convergence, the activation of the high seat. He told her it plainly and in sequence, and he watched her face move through surprise, through professional excitement, through the specific expression of someone calculating how large something was getting, and he saw the moment she understood the full scope of it, because she stopped taking notes for approximately 3 seconds, which he suspected was the longest she'd gone without moving in the course of any interview she'd ever conducted. 18 houses, she said. 18. Including, she looked at her notes, the founder's lines. 4 of them. And the high seat is, when you say active, the magic activated during the assessment. Gringotts has confirmed it. The formal Wiesengemot notification goes out within 48 hours, per the Wizarding Succession Act of 1793. Rita set her quick quotes quill down entirely, which Harry suspected she'd never done in a professional capacity. She looked at him with something that was genuinely, uncomplicatedly odd. "This is going to change everything," she said. "It's going to clarify certain things," Harry said. "That's different. The story I want you to tell is this: for nearly 3 centuries, an ancient magical seat has been dormant. The magical framework of Wizarding Britain was built in its absence. The seat has now been activated by the rightful Convergence heir. This is not a political event, it is a magical fact. It is not something that can be disputed, challenged, or repealed by any ministry body, because the seat predates the ministry. Write that story." And the human angle? Rita's professional instincts were clearly fighting with themselves, the urge to add drama, to speculate, to make it personal in the tabloid sense of personal. The human angle is this: a 16-year-old who has spent 15 years being told who he is found out today who he actually is. That's enough story. You don't need to invent any more of it. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Then she picked up her quill. They spent an hour on it. Harry guided every sentence, and Sirius sat to one side and occasionally contributed a specific legal or historical framing that was more useful than anything Harry could have added there. Rita wrote quickly, the quill moved with the confidence of genuine craft. Whatever else she was genuinely good at this, and when she had a draft she read it back and Harry listened and corrected 3 things and approved the rest. It was, he had to admit, extremely good. She had taken the plain facts and shaped them into something that moved, something that felt like a tide coming in, inevitable, larger than any individual reaction to it. The headline was, "Ancient Magical Seat Awakens, the Heir of 18 Houses and the Kingship That Never Died." Harry made her change kingship to high seat in the headline. Kingship was a word that made people think of crowns and thrones and absolute power, which would get fudges back up in the wrong way before the public had time to understand what it actually meant. She left at midnight looking like someone who had just been handed the story of her career and was already working out how to leverage it into the next 10 years of her professional life, which was fine. This deal gave them both what they needed. Harry had long since moved past the idea that alliances required the other party to be virtuous. Upstairs, in the room Sirius had booked, Harry fell asleep at 12:30 and woke at 7, which was the best night's sleep he'd had since sometime in May. Augusta Longbottom arrived at 8 o'clock with the punctuality of a natural law. Harry was on his second cup of tea in the private back room Sirius had arranged when she came through the door, and the first thing she did was look at Harry with an expression that conducted a rapid and thorough assessment of his general condition, and the second thing she did was sit down without being invited, because she was in the habit of sitting where she chose. She was shorter than he remembered, or perhaps it was that he was taller than he'd been the last time he'd seen her. The hat with the stuffed vulture was present. She carried a cane she clearly didn't need, which Harry suspected she carried because it was useful for pointing at things she disapproved of. "Tea," she said, and it wasn't a question, and Sirius poured it without comment. She looked at Harry. "Sirius tells me the inheritance assessment was conducted yesterday." "Yes. And the result?" "You'll read the full account in the Prophet this morning," Harry said. "But the summary, 18 houses, including the 4 founders' lines. The high seat activation. Gringotts has confirmed all of it. Augusta Longbottom was 73 years old and had been in the Wiesengemot since 1953 and had buried a husband, raised a grandson, and survived 2 wars without visible diminishment, and even she went still for a moment. The high seat, she said. Active. Confirmed. She looked at her tea. Then she looked at Harry. Then she picked up her tea and drank half of it and set it down. "All right," she said. "Tell me everything, and don't leave out the parts you think I won't like." So Harry told her, all of it this time, including the sealed core and the suppressed bloodline records and the Dumbledore question, because Augusta Longbottom was in his corner or she wasn't, and if she was then she needed the real information, and if she wasn't then he needed to know that before she was in the room with him for any longer. She listened without interrupting, which was the behavior of someone who knew how to gather information before forming a response. Her expression didn't give much away except that she was thinking hard, and when Harry finished she was quiet for almost 30 seconds. "Dumbledore," she said finally. "Yes." "He would have had reasons," she said slowly, and it came out neither as a defense nor as an accusation, just as an observation. "He always has reasons. The difficulty with Albus Dumbledore is that his reasons are never petty. They are never small or self-serving. They are grand and far-sighted and they involve the correct ultimate outcome and they treat the people involved as variables in a calculation rather than as," she stopped. Rephrased. "He is the kind of man who saves the world by deciding, on everyone else's behalf, what saving the world requires." "Yes," Harry said. "That's exactly right. You're going to confront him today. This morning. After this. What do you want from that conversation?" It was a sharp question, the kind that cut to the thing underneath the surface. Harry had been thinking about it since last night. "I want him to explain himself," Harry said. "Without managing me. Without framing it as being for my own good. I want the actual reasons, what he was afraid would happen if I had access to my full magic and my full inheritance at 15 months old, or at 11, or at 13, or at 15. And I want to know whether he was ever going to remove them. And if you don't like his answers, then I act on my own authority," Harry said, "which I now have, and which is not subordinate to his." Augusta looked at him for a long moment. The vulture on her hat had a glassy eye that caught the light and was somehow equally evaluating. "The Wizengamot," she said, shifting smoothly, "is going to receive its formal notification within 48 hours. When they do, the session will be called immediately. Fudge won't wait, because he'll know that every hour he waits is an hour in which the wizarding public is reading this morning's prophet and forming opinions. He'll want to frame the institution's response before opinion solidifies." She paused. "He'll attempt to contest the assessment's validity. He has no legal basis for this, but he'll attempt it anyway, because Cornelius Fudge has never once in his life let legal reality stand between him and the outcome he wanted. He'll argue that the founding charter's provisions for the high seat are obsolete, superseded by modern legislation. Are they? No. The founding charter cannot be superseded by any legislation passed under its own authority, because all legislation passed by the Wizengamot is passed under the authority it derives from the charter. It's circular. You cannot use the delegated power to cancel the original grant." Augusta almost smiled. "It's a logical trap that several ministers have tried to navigate over the years, usually regarding inconvenient provisions about goblin rights or werewolf protections. They always fail for the same reason. So Fudge can't legally contest it," Harry said. "He can't. He'll try anyway. He'll also try to build a political coalition in the Wizengamot to pass a resolution declaring the high seat provision symbolic rather than functional, essentially a motion that says yes, this technically exists, but we've all agreed to ignore it. That can pass with a simple majority. How many votes does he have in the current Wizengamot?" Augusta considered. "Approximately 50 seats. There are 103 in total. He needs 52 to pass a simple resolution, 60 for a charter amendment, which as I said is impossible anyway. So if I have 52 votes before the session is called," Harry said, "the resolution fails before it's tabled." "Correct. How many seats do I hold directly? Between all 18 houses?" Augusta blinked. Then looked at Sirius. Sirius handed her the scroll. She unrolled it across the breakfast table, pushing aside the teapot with the authority of someone accustomed to making space, and ran her finger down the house listings. Each of the 4 founder houses holds 3 seats in the old tradition, she said, more to herself than to Harry, counting under her breath. Potter holds 2. Black holds 2. Peveril holds 1. The remaining houses, her finger moved down the list, Pruitt, Selwyn, Macmillan, the 3 secondary houses, 1 each. She looked up. You directly hold, personally, through these houses, 31 Wisengamot seats. And the houses with political alliances? Sirius asked. Traditional block voting, the noble houses that historically aligned with the founders' seats. That's another question, Augusta said, with the particular energy of someone whose expertise has been correctly engaged. The old alliance structure, if it were invoked formally, which it hasn't been since 1843, would obligate the allied houses to vote with the primary seat holder on matters of constitutional significance. The Bones family. The Longbottom family. She paused. The Longbottom family holds 2 seats, and I can tell you right now where those votes are going. Her expression made it very clear that this was not a question. That's 33, Harry said. Amelia Bones. Head of the DMLE. Career civil servant, not easily pushed. She has loathed Fudge professionally for about 4 years, he keeps trying to cut her department's budget and she keeps blocking it, and they have a relationship that is approximately as warm as 2 people in adjacent ice baths. Augusta looked at Harry with something that was the beginning of sharp interest. She is also scrupulously fair. If you approach her directly, on the merits, without trying to pressure her, she'll respect that. She holds 1 seat in the Wisengamot in her own right and has influence over 3 more through the DMLE's advisory role. 37, Sirius said quietly. With 9 more possible through the secondary alliance houses, Augusta said. The Abbotts, the Clearwaters, the Ogdens, they held traditionally aligned positions. They haven't been invoked in over 100 years, but they haven't been formally dissolved either. She set the scroll down. You could walk into the Wisengamot session with a near majority before Fudge has had time to make his opening statement. Harry drank his tea in thought. The session shouldn't be a fight, he said. Not yet. If it looks like a power grab, a teenager showing up to take over, it plays badly, even with the right votes. He looked at Augusta. It should look like what it is. A constitutional fact being acknowledged. I walk in, I take my seats, I listen, I let Fudge make his move, and then I respond to that specific move on its specific merits. I don't walk in with an agenda. I walk in with standing. Augusta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your father was a good wizard and a brave man. But you don't think like him. He thought fast and in the moment. This is different. I've had a lot of practice being in situations where I had no power and needed to think my way to a better position, Harry said. Something moved across her face, not pity, nothing as condescending as that, but a kind of acknowledgement that had weight in it. I'll reach out to the Bones and Longbottom seats today, she said. Discreetly. And I'll begin mapping the Alliance House positions. You'll want to know where everyone stands before you walk into that chamber. Thank you, Harry said. She stood, which was the signal that the meeting was done and that she was satisfied with how it had gone, which seemed to be a significant endorsement from a woman who, Sirius had implied, was not easily satisfied with anything. One more thing, she said at the door. When you speak to Dumbledore, she paused, choosing words with the care of someone who had been choosing words in important rooms for a long time, remember that he is not your enemy. He may have been wrong. He may have been significantly, painfully wrong, in ways that had real costs to you. But wrong and enemy are different categories, and treating them as the same will cost you allies you'll need. She left. The door closed behind her with the quiet authority of a door that knew its place. Sirius exhaled. She's terrifying, he said. She's fantastic, Harry said. She's exactly what I needed. He folded the scroll and put it in his jacket pocket, He'd been carrying it since Gringotts, in the inside pocket where he could feel the faint warmth of the gold ink against his chest, and stood up. "Dumbledore," he said. Sirius nodded. "I'll come with you." "No. Harry, he'll manage the room differently if you're there. He'll calibrate everything for both of us. I need to be alone with him for this." Harry met Sirius's eyes. "I can handle it. You know I can handle it." Sirius held his gaze for a moment. He knew, Harry could see him knowing, that Harry was right, that two people in the room gave Dumbledore something to navigate, a dynamic to control, while one person with questions and no emotional lever to pull on except Harry himself was something different. "If you're not back or in contact within 4 hours," Sirius said, "I'm coming to wherever you are and I'm being significantly less diplomatic about it." "Fine." Harry sent his Patronus ahead. The stag bounded out of his wand and through the leaky cauldron wall with the easy confidence it always had, the confidence that was partly Harry's and partly something older, something that lived in the shape of the spell, carrying a single-sentence message to Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts: "I need to speak with you today. I'm coming to the school." The stag left and Harry pocketed his wand and walked out into the morning. Diagon Alley was bright and busy at 9 in the morning, and the Prophet had hit the stands. He saw it at the newsagent just inside the alley entrance, the display copy pinned above the rack, Rita's article above the fold with the headline in heavy black type: "Ancient Magical Seat Awakens, the heir of 18 houses and Britain's High Seat finds its Lord after 287 years. She'd changed his suggested headline slightly. The result was better than his version. Around the newsagent, 3 separate witches were standing with copies open, reading with the focused intensity of people encountering something they weren't sure they'd understood correctly. 2 wizards by the apothecary were discussing something quickly and with their hands, which was always the sign of a conversation that had just gotten more interesting than it was supposed to be. A mother buying school supplies with her daughter had stopped entirely and was staring at the Prophet in her basket. Harry walked past all of it and through the leaky cauldron and out onto Charing Cross Road. He could have taken the night bus, but he opted instead. His test was technically scheduled for August, but the restriction on underage magic didn't apply to the holder of a Wisengamot seat, and it definitely didn't apply to the activated high seat, and he'd confirmed this with Augusta, who had confirmed it with a nod that conveyed both legal accuracy and a certain satisfaction in the Ministry being unable to fine him for it, and arrived at the edge of the Hogwarts grounds with the slightly disorienting lurch of side-along compressed to 1. The castle in July was different. Quieter in the way that all buildings were quieter when emptied of the people who gave them their personality, though the magic of the place was unchanged, still enormous and layered and ancient. Harry's ward sense, still settling, still unfamiliar, like a new sense he was learning to read, picked it up immediately: the outer school wards, the Dumbledore-placed security of the last several years, and beneath all of those, the original castle enchantments, 11 centuries old and deep as bedrock. He walked up the grounds and through the main doors and down the corridors, which were empty and echoing and smelled of summer and stone, and climbed to the 7th floor and the gargoyle guardian of the headmaster's office. The gargoyle stepped aside without him saying anything. Which meant Dumbledore had released the ward entirely, which meant the Patronus message had arrived and he was expected and the door was open. Harry climbed the spiral stairs. The office was exactly as he knew it, the circular room, the portraits of previous headmasters dozing or watching with interest, the various magical instruments that whirred and ticked and measured things Harry didn't have names for, Fawkes on his perch turning his head to look at Harry with the liquid intelligence that phoenixes had in abundance. Dumbledore was behind his desk, and he rose when Harry came in. He looked old today. He always looked old, but today the age had a different quality, less the distinguished age of a man at the height of his authority and more the age of a man who had not slept well and was working to conceal it. His eyes, which were still the blue that Harry had always associated with a particular quality of kindness, were watching Harry with an attention that was very careful. "Harry," he said. "Please sit down." "I'd rather stand," Harry said. A pause. Dumbledore sat back down, slowly. "I see," he said. "And then, I received the bank notification this morning. I had expected, eventually, but perhaps not quite this soon. You knew it would come eventually, Harry said. The assessment was required under the 1793 Act. You couldn't have prevented me from having it forever. Which means you had a plan for when it happened. I had hoped, Dumbledore said carefully, to be part of the conversation when it did. To be able to explain it now, Harry said. 6 Seals. November 1981. I was 15 months old. Why? The fire in the hearth crackled. Fawkes made a low sound and settled his feathers. Dumbledore looked at his desk for a moment, and Harry could see him doing the thing he always did, the calibration, the careful selection of how to frame what he was about to say, and Harry waited with his arms at his sides and said nothing, because the silence was more useful than anything he could fill it with. After your parents died, Dumbledore said, and after we discovered what had happened when Voldemort's curse rebounded, I became aware of several things simultaneously. The first was that you had survived through a magic we didn't fully understand, and that the nature of that survival had marked you in ways we couldn't entirely predict. The second was that when the full scope of your inheritance was assessed, which I did, privately, that November, the results were considerable. 18 houses, Harry said. 18 houses, Dumbledore confirmed. And the High Seat. Active. Exactly as it was confirmed yesterday. He looked at Harry. You were 15 months old. Voldemort was not dead. I knew even then that the body we had was not the end of it, that he would return. And the intelligence networks we had, the Death Eaters still active, the informants still in place, told us that if the full scope of your inheritance became known, you would be targeted. Not to defeat you. To control you. A child with the legal authority of the High Seat, controlled by the right people, would have more power than any minister, than any Dark Lord. You would have been the most valuable hostage in the history of the wizarding world. Harry said nothing. The seals on your core were not punitive, Dumbledore said, and here there was something in his voice that was not quite asking for understanding but was positioned adjacent to it. They were protective. A powerful, unsealed magical core in an infant who would be monitored, tracked, and eventually targeted. You kept them in place, Harry said. For 15 years. At what point did I stop being a target and start being old enough to make the choice myself? Silence. When were you going to remove them? Harry asked. Had you scheduled it? Was there a plan? At 17? At 18? When Voldemort was defeated? He held Dumbledore's gaze. Or was the plan to tell me about it when you judged the time was right, which is the same plan you've had for every piece of information that concerned my life? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that was long enough to be its own answer. I made a decision, he said finally, in 1981, to protect a child from an impossible situation. And I continued to make that decision, year by year, because the situation did not resolve. Voldemort returned. The threats didn't diminish, they increased. And perhaps, he stopped. Tried again. Perhaps I allowed the habit of deciding to persist beyond the point where it was my decision to make. Yes, Harry said. You did. Another silence. In the portraits, several of the painted headmasters were watching with the focused attention of people who had been in politics long enough to know when they were watching something important. My mother's records, Harry said. Her bloodline. Altered in the Department of Mysteries before she started Hogwarts. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. Yes. That one I don't have a charitable explanation for. I had one at the time, Dumbledore said. The Emery's line. Merlin's primary descent. If that had been known, if Lily had been identified as what she was, the attention it would have attracted, from both sides, you decided, Harry said. For her. Without asking her. She went through her whole life thinking she was Muggle-born, thinking she was the first in her family, and you knew she wasn't. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. I did. Did she ever know? No. The fire crackled. Harry stood and looked at the most powerful wizard alive and felt, not triumph, not vindication, but something sadder and quieter and more complicated. The man across the desk was not a villain. He was a man who had spent 70 years doing what he was certain was right and had, in certain specific and significant ways, been wrong, and the wrongness had compounded quietly across decades until it sat in this room between them like a third person. "I'm not here to punish you," Harry said. "I'm here because I needed you to say it. The truth of it, without framing, without the greater good. I needed to hear it said plainly." "Then I say it plainly," Dumbledore said. "I was wrong, Harry. Not about the threat, that was real. But about my right to make those choices for you, and for your mother, and to continue making them past any point where they could be called protection and not control. I was wrong." Harry nodded. "The Wisengamot notification goes out tomorrow at the latest," Harry said. "Fudge will call an emergency session. I'll be there with my seats. I want you to understand that I'm going to act on my own authority going forward. That means I'll listen to your counsel when you offer it. But I won't be managed. And I won't be," he searched for the word, "directed. By you or anyone else." Dumbledore looked at him across the desk, and whatever he saw, whatever had been in Harry since yesterday when the seals broke and the door opened, something in the old man seemed to settle. Not defeat. Not relief exactly. The specific exhaustion of a man who had been holding a weight for a very long time, and had just been told he could put it down. "No," Dumbledore said softly. "You won't. And then, I'm glad the basin knew what it was doing." Harry almost smiled. He turned and walked toward the door. "Harry." Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the threshold. "The connection between you and Voldemort, the blood connection through the Slytherin line, and the other connection. The one made in 1981. The seals did not create it, but they contained some of its effects. Now that they're gone, I know," Harry said. "I've already thought about it. Be careful." "I'm always careful," Harry said, which was a moderate lie and they both knew it, and he walked out the door and down the spiral stairs and back through the empty summer corridors of the castle he'd called home for 6 years, and out into the July sunlight. On the walk back to the gates, his ward sense caught something. A pulse in the castle wards, deep in the foundation enchantments, in the oldest layer of Hogwarts magic, something that hadn't moved in a very long time, shifting slightly. Orienting. He felt it the way you felt a compass needle finding north. The castle knew who he was. He stood at the gates for a moment and felt it. Felt the deep, ancient magical presence of the school he'd been coming to since he was 11, the place that was the first thing he'd ever called home, feeling it now from the other side, from inside the knowledge of what he was, and the sensation was extraordinary. Not power, exactly. More like recognition, mutual and final. He stepped through the gates and operated back to London, and didn't look back, and didn't need to. Chapter 3, The vaults beneath the prophet hit the wizarding world like a stone into still water. Harry felt the ripples before he even saw them. By the time he operated back to the leaky cauldron from Hogwarts, Sirius was at the bar with a copy of the paper, and 3 separate witches had stopped him between the door and the booth to say things that ranged from "Is it true to my mother always said the old ways would come back" to one older wizard who simply gripped Harry's arm with both hands and said nothing at all, just looked at him with eyes that were doing something complicated, and then let go and walked away. Sirius watched this from the bar. "It's been like that all morning," he said, when Harry sat down. "Tom's had to restock twice already. Everyone wants the prophet and everyone wants to talk about what's in it." Harry picked up the copy. Rita had done something he hadn't fully anticipated, she'd written it beautifully. Stripped of the usual Skeeter sensationalism, the story had a quality of inevitability to it, of something being named that had always existed unnamed. The prose was clean and the facts were presented without editorializing, and the effect was of a door being opened onto something very old and very certain. It was the best work she'd ever put her name to, probably because it was the only story she'd ever written that didn't need embellishment. Below the fold was a sidebar with a brief historical account of the High Seat, which Harry suspected Rita had pulled from a reference text rather than written herself, and which laid out the founding charter provisions in language accessible enough that the average reader would understand, in simple terms, that what had happened was not a political event but a magical and constitutional one. Fudge's office has already issued a statement, Sirius said, sliding a second piece of parchment across. Standard ministry response: they're calling for an independent review of the assessment, questioning Gringotts' methodology, and reminding people that the ministry is the legitimate governing authority of Wizarding Britain. Harry read it. It was exactly as Augusta had predicted, the language of an institution trying to get in front of something it couldn't stop. The word review appeared 4 times in 3 paragraphs. He'll call the Wisengamot session tomorrow, Harry said. He can't wait longer than that, or it looks like he's avoiding it. Agreed. Sirius lowered his voice. Augusta old an hour ago. She's confirmed the Bones and Longbottom seats. She also reached the Macmillan representative, who apparently required about 40 seconds of explanation before agreeing, because the Macmillan family has been waiting for exactly this situation since they recorded it in their house history in 1823. He paused. And one more thing. You got an owl from Gringotts. He handed it over. The envelope was the same cream-colored heavy paper as the original assessment letter, but thicker. Harry opened it. Lord Potter, it read. As part of the completed inheritance acceptance, you are entitled to access all holdings within Gringotts' care. This includes the primary Potter Vault, Vault 687, which you have previously visited. It does not include the vaults sealed under the Bloodline access protocols, which were locked pending confirmation of inheritance and have not been opened since 1981. These are the Lord's Vault, Vault 1, the Peveril Vault, Vault 3, and the High Seat Archive Vault, Vault 0. Vault 0 has not been opened since the death of Edmund Pendragon in 1709. We recommend you visit at your earliest convenience. There are time-sensitive items. Ironforge Senior Assessor P.S. The Goblins of Gringotts wish to note that Vault 0 has been waiting for 287 years. It can wait another day if necessary. But Ragnarok IV suggests it should not wait too. Harry read the postscript twice. Today, he said. Today, Sirius agreed, with the energy of someone who had been trying to maintain reasonable caution about everything and had just found a reason to abandon it. They were at Gringotts by 11. Ironforge met them at the private entrance. He seemed to have taken up a kind of permanent residence there, or perhaps the bank simply summoned him whenever Harry arrived, which Harry suspected was closer to the truth. He led them not to the assessment room but further in, past the familiar cart boarding area where a single black cart waited on tracks that went down into the dark at a steeper angle than any Harry had taken before. The primary vaults are on level 4, Ironforge said. The Lord's Vault is on level 9. The Peveril Vault is on level 12. The High Seat Archive is on level 0. He said this last with the careful neutrality of someone mentioning something significant without commenting on its significance. Level 0, Sirius said. Below the dragon levels, Ironforge said. The temperature is different down there. The magic is also different. There are no guards on Vault 0. There have never needed to be. Harry got in the cart. Sirius got in after him. Ironforge took the operator's position, and the cart dropped. Harry had made this trip before, the vertiginous plunge into the dark, the wind and speed and the tracks twisting through the rock like something alive had carved them. He'd always found it exhilarating in a way he'd never entirely admitted to Hermione, who white-knuckled through every Gringotts visit. But this descent was something else. The familiar levels blurred past, the warm glow of the standard vault areas, the cooler blue-lit sections of the senior vaults, and then they were past the dragon level, and Harry heard and felt rather than saw the massive presence of the security creatures in their caverns on either side, and then even that fell away, and the track leveled and the cart moved through a section of tunnel that was utterly, completely dark. Not dark like nighttime. Dark like the absence of light had been a permanent condition here since before light was invented. The cart stopped. Light came from somewhere, not torchlight, not the bank's sconce light, but a cold and very old luminescence that came from the rock itself. Faint. Blue-white. It illuminated a corridor perhaps 10 feet wide, with a ceiling lost in shadow above, and 3 doors. The first was ordinary-looking in the Gringotts way, large, iron-bound, rune-carved. The second was smaller and older, the iron of it darkened past black into something more like the absence of color. The third was not a door in any conventional sense. It was an archway carved into the living rock, and through the archway was darkness, and in that darkness was a faint gold pulse. Steady. Rhythmic. The same rhythm Harry had first noticed in the assessment basin and had since recognized as something older than any specific magic, the heartbeat of accumulated inheritance, of power waiting for the hand it recognized. Lord's Vault first, Ironforge said. Then Peveril. Vault 0 will take time. We should build toward it. The Lord's Vault opened to Harry's hand against the door, no key, no password, just the recognition of the inheritance magic in the door's enchantment meeting the same in him. It swung inward smoothly, silently, for something that had been sealed since 1981. The room beyond was not a vault in the standard sense. It was a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall, filled with books and scrolls and document boxes and objects that ranged from obviously magical to entirely mysterious. A reading table in the center with 2 chairs. Lamps that lit themselves as they entered, with a warm, amber light that made everything look like the inside of a memory. Family records, Ironforge said from the door. The Lord's Vault is not a treasure vault. It is the administrative center of House Potter, contracts, alliances, correspondence, the voting record from every Wisengamot session your family has attended since 1213. He paused. And personal effects. Your parents stored things here before Godric's Hollow. Harry walked slowly along the nearest shelf. The books were old, most of them, the Potter family chronicles, arranged by date, going back centuries. He pulled one from the late 1800s and opened it to a random page and read a paragraph in a handwriting he didn't recognize about a dispute over road widening in the magical district of Edinburgh, and it was entirely unremarkable and entirely, quietly extraordinary in the way that the first evidence of your own deep history always was. He moved to the personal effects section. There were several boxes, clearly more recently placed than the rest of the vault's contents. The labels on them were in handwriting he recognized from the few pieces he still had. His mother's handwriting. He didn't open them. Not today. Today was a different kind of work, and those boxes were a different kind of conversation that required more time and less company. He looked at them for a moment, noted their presence, and stepped back. I'll come back, he said. Whenever you wish, Ironforge said. The Peveril Vault was different. Older, colder, and the objects on its shelves had the quality of things that had been waiting so long the waiting had become their natural state. Most of it was artifacts, magical objects of various kinds, many of them beyond Harry's ability to identify on sight, some of them radiating a faint magical presence that his newly unsealed awareness picked up like heat from a fire. Not dark magic, not exactly, but old magic, which was its own category. At the back of the vault was a locked chest. Ironforge produced a key from somewhere in his jacket and handed it to Harry, who unlocked it. Inside were 3 items, each wrapped in dark cloth, a slender wand, bone pale and cold, a flat stone engraved with a single symbol, and a cloak, folded in silver-gray silk. Harry looked at them. He didn't touch them yet. They were separated, Ironforge said, from a respectful distance. After the original story. The wand passed through many hands. It was returned to the Peveril Vault by Ignotus's line, your direct ancestor, approximately 2 centuries ago. The stone was found and returned by Goblin archivists in 1612. The cloak you have encountered before. My invisibility cloak, Harry said. The Deathly Hallows, Ironforge said, in the way someone said a thing they'd been waiting a long time to say in the right room to the right person. Together. All 3, with their rightful master. Harry looked at the 3 objects for a long time. The wand pulled at his awareness, pulled at the magic in him in a way that was different from any other object he'd ever been near, a specific gravitational quality, like a compass needle responding to north. The stone was quiet, closed, heavy with something contained. The cloak was familiar. He'd had it for 5 years. He knew it like he knew his own hands. He picked up the invisibility cloak first, because it was the one he knew. It settled over his arm with the same weightless cool he'd always known. Then the stone, he held it on his palm without turning it, just felt the weight. Then, last, the wand. The moment he touched it, the vault went quiet. Not literally quiet, Sirius exhaled softly at his shoulder, Ironforge made a very small sound, the ambient magical hum of the vault continued, but there was a quality that descended on the room that was the magical equivalent of a room going silent. The wand was cold and then warming in his grip. It was nothing like his holly wand, that had felt like a handshake, like meeting someone you'd get on with. This felt like recognition of a different order. This felt like being known by something that had always known you and was simply waiting for you to arrive. He set it down carefully and stepped back. "I'll take all 3, he said. "But not today. Today I come back for them when I have time to understand what I'm taking." Ironforge nodded, and the quality in the room shifted back to normal. They left the Peveril vault and stood again in the cold blue-white light of the deep corridor. Vault 0. The archway in the rock, the darkness beyond it, the gold pulse slow and deep and patient, 287 years of patience, enough patience to make everything else feel recent. "There is no door," Ironforge said. "There never has been. Vault 0 is not sealed by any lock. It is sealed by inheritance. Prior to yesterday, any individual entering that archway would have found nothing but stone. Now," he inclined his head. "What's in it?" Sirius asked. "We don't know," Ironforge said, with the equanimity of a man who has made peace with a mystery. "No goblin has ever been inside. We know it exists because the founding charter references it and because every inheritance assessment conducted since 1709 has detected it and registered it empty of a rightful heir. We know it is a vault because that is what it is called in our records. What it contains, we have not seen in nearly 3 centuries." Harry looked at the archway. The gold pulse moved through the dark beyond it like light through water. "Stay here," he said. Sirius opened his mouth. "Sirius." Harry looked at him. "I'll be fine." Sirius looked at the archway. Looked at Harry. "You have no idea what's in there." "No," Harry agreed cheerfully, and walked through the archway. The darkness lasted 1 step. Then the room lit itself. It was large, much larger than the corridor outside suggested it should be, which was a trick of spatial expansion magic that Gringotts apparently considered appropriate even 2 levels below the dragons. The ceiling was high and the walls were curved and the floor was smooth stone that had worn itself, over centuries, into a faint concavity in the center, the way stone wore when people stood in one place and waited. The room was not empty. Along the walls, on shelves carved from the same living rock as everything else down here, were objects that Harry took several steps toward before stopping and just looking. Armor, old and magnificent, that had clearly never been ornamental. Weapons that were enchanted in ways he could feel from 10 feet away. Books that were chained to their shelves, which he had learned by now meant books that were potent enough to be dangerous if opened without preparation. Documents in sealed cases. Portraits, not the magical talking kind, but painted portraits of people he didn't recognize but whose faces had elements he almost recognized, the way you recognized a word in a foreign language because you knew the Latin root. Kings. He was looking at kings. These were the previous holders of the high seat, painted in the years of their reign, and they were looking back at him with expressions that ranged from evaluating to satisfied to something that might have been relief. In the center of the room, on a plinth of the same worn stone as the floor, was a crown. Not an enormous, theatrical crown. Not the kind of thing you saw in paintings of ceremonies. It was understated in size, almost surprisingly so, a circlet of dark metal, 8-pointed, each point ending in a different small stone. The same crown that had appeared as a symbol at the bottom of his assessment scroll. The gold pulse he'd been tracking was coming from it, steady and quiet and entirely certain of itself. Beside the crown, on a smaller plinth, was a letter. Harry crossed the room to it. The letter was sealed with wax, the same 8-pointed crown sigil, but the wax was soft, which was impossible, because it had been here since 1709, which meant the preservation charm on this room was genuinely extraordinary. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was formal and clear, and the ink was brown with age but perfectly legible. To whoever has opened this vault, and therefore is the rightful heir of convergence sufficient to do so, my name is Edmund Pendragon. I am the last holder of this crown before you, and I write this in the full knowledge that I will not produce an heir, because the heir is not mine to produce. The bloodlines I carry will scatter after my death, and the convergence will rebuild itself in its own time, in ways I cannot predict and have not tried to. What I can tell you is what this crown is and what it does, so that you don't walk into your inheritance uninformed. The High Seat is not a title. It is a living magical contract between the crown's holder and the magic of Britain itself, the old magic, the deep kind, the kind that was here before any of us named it. The crown holds that contract. When you put it on, you become party to it. This means, in practical terms, the wards of every property in Britain that falls within your holdings will recognize you directly. The deep magic enchantments on these islands, the ones that maintain the statute of secrecy, the boundary enchantments between magical and muggle space, the old protections on places of magical significance, will include you in their structure. You will feel them. You will be able to influence them. This is not comfortable knowledge. It is also not optional. It means, in political terms, every witch and wizard in Britain operates under a magical framework that includes your authority at its foundation. Most of them don't know this. Some of them do and prefer not to think about it. A very small number will fight you for it, and they will be wrong, and the magic will back you, but that doesn't make the fight less real. What I recommend, based on what I know of the time I ruled in and what I imagine may be true of the time you rule in, don't use the crown's authority unless you need to. Be the thing the magic of Britain recognizes before you are the thing people have to acknowledge. When those two facts align, and they will, you will find that resistance becomes a great deal less interesting than it initially appeared. I left this room as full as I could make it. The armor in the north alcove was made for my predecessor 8 generations back and will adjust to fit you. The books are dangerous but the chains will release to your hand. The weapon on the east wall is the oldest object in this vault. It predates us all and I don't entirely know what it does, but it has never been wrong about a threat. Good luck. The magic has been patient. Give it something worth waiting for. Edmund Pendragon, October 28, 1709. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket, with the scroll, so that both pieces of paper rested against his chest. He stood in front of the crown for a long time. Then he picked it up. It was lighter than it looked. The dark metal was warm, genuinely warm, not room temperature warm but actively warm, the warmth of something alive. The 8 stones at the points of the circlet were different colors. He counted them, red, blue, yellow, green, 2 that he didn't have clean names for, 1 that was black in some lights and translucent in others, and 1 that was gold. He turned it in his hands. Felt the gold pulse from it, slow and certain. Felt the deep contract Edmund had described, not yet active, not yet engaged, just present, waiting at the boundary of contact like something at a door. He set it back on the plinth. Not yet. The crown was here. It would stay here. He would come back for it when he was ready, and he would be ready soon, but not in a Gringotts vault at 11 in the morning on the day after he'd discovered all of this. Edmund's letter had said, "Be the thing the magic recognizes before you are the thing people have to acknowledge." He wasn't quite there yet. He needed the Wisengamot session first. He needed the public acknowledgement on his terms. He explored the rest of the vault for the better part of an hour, cataloging without taking. The armor in the north alcove watched him with the particular quality of objects that had been enchanted by craftsmen who considered their work personal. The book's chains released to his hand, as Edmund had promised, though he only opened 3 of them and read a page of each and then closed them carefully. The east wall weapon was a sword, plain hilted and completely unadorned, and he did not touch it yet but stood before it for several seconds and felt the enormous age of it, the weight of it in the room's magical atmosphere, and understood why Edmund had said it was older than all of them. He walked back out through the archway. Sirius was sitting on the floor of the corridor with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up, eating something from a paper bag that turned out to be biscuits, which he'd apparently conjured from somewhere in his jacket pockets. He looked up when Harry emerged. "You were in there for an hour and 12 minutes, he said. "Was I? How was it?" Harry thought about Edmund's letter. About the crown warm in his hands. About the sword on the east wall and the armor in the north alcove and the particular feeling of standing in a room that had been waiting for specifically you. "Extraordinary," he said. Ironforge stood slightly apart, maintaining the professional distance of someone who was restraining significant curiosity and was going to continue restraining it for as long as necessary but found it genuinely difficult. "There's a crown," Harry said to him. "I'm leaving it here for now. I want this vault secured to the same standard as the Peveril vault, and I want it understood that no one enters without my direct authorization." "Of course," Ironforge said, with the speed of someone who had already been thinking this. "And I want a full inventory prepared. Just a list, I'll do the reading and cataloging myself, but I need to know what's there. I can have a catalog prepared from our records within a day. What exists in that vault was logged when it was sealed in 1709 and has not changed since." "Good." They rode the cart back up to the surface. The ascent was different from the descent, not the headlong drop but a series of rises and curves, the rock brightening gradually from the deep cold blue of the low levels to the warmer colors of the upper ones, until the familiar amberlit spaces of the main vault area appeared around them and Harry felt the shift from deep magic pressure to regular magic atmosphere like stepping out of cold water. He checked his watch in the main hall. 1:30 in the afternoon. "I need to meet Amelia Bones," he said. Sirius, who had been straightening his jacket from the cart ride, looked up. "You've made an appointment?" "Not yet. But Augusta said she'd respond to a direct approach on the merits without pressure." He thought for a moment. "The DMLE offices are in the ministry. You could send an owl." "I could. But walking into her office is different from sending an owl. An owl is a request. Walking into her office is a statement about how seriously I take this meeting." Sirius considered this. "You're going to walk into the ministry building?" "Yes. Where there is currently a minister trying to organize a coalition against you." "Also yes. In the middle of a day when half the wizarding world is reading the prophet story about you. Ideally before Fudge's afternoon briefing, yes. That's why we should go now." A long pause. "I cannot," Sirius said, "walk into the ministry." "I know. I'll go alone." "You said 4 hours. I said if you weren't back in 4 hours. I'll be back in 2. Sirius looked at him with the expression of a man who had accepted, somewhere in the last 24 hours, that his role in this was going to be less protective guardian and more concerned backup, and who was making his peace with this with reasonable grace. "Don't set anything on fire," he said. "Sirius. Metaphorically." "I'll try," Harry said, which was honest. The Ministry of Magic atrium was not at its most composed when Harry stepped out of the flue at 1:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. The atrium's gold fountain sparkled and the golden statues gleamed and the black floor reflected everything with its usual bureaucratic polish, but the witches and wizards moving through the space had the quality of people who'd been having a busy morning and expected a busier afternoon, walking faster than usual, talking in lower voices, clustering in pairs near lifts with conversations that stopped when the doors opened. Harry walked to the security desk. Eric Munch looked at his name tag, looked at Harry, and looked at his name tag again. "Wand," he said, in the slightly dazed way of someone performing a routine task that had suddenly become non-routine. Harry placed his wand on the scale. It produced its usual registration card. Eric looked at the card, at Harry, and back at the card. Purpose of visit, he said. Meeting with Madame Bones, Harry said. Is it, do you have an appointment? No, Harry said pleasantly, pocketing his wand and walking to the lifts. The lift to the DMLE was level 2. Harry rode it alone, because the two wizards who had been waiting for it when he arrived took one look at him and decided they needed to wait for the next one, which told him the prophet had circulated more widely than just Diagon Alley. The DMLE reception was manned by a young witch who was in the middle of sorting a stack of interdepartmental memos and who looked up when Harry came through the door and went very still. I'd like to see Madame Bones, Harry said. I know I don't have an appointment. Tell her Harry Potter is here and that I'd like to speak with her about the Wizengamot session. The witch looked at him for a moment, then picked up the interdepartmental communicator on her desk and spoke into it quietly. A pause. Then, she'll see you now. Amelia Bones's office was large by ministry standards, which meant it was merely not small, with a window that looked out onto the enchanted exterior sky and a desk covered in organized stacks of parchment that told Harry she was the kind of person who always knew where everything was. She was behind the desk when he came in, a stocky, broad-shouldered woman with a monocle and an expression of calm, professional intelligence that reminded him, in the best possible way, of McGonagall. She stood when he entered. Not out of deference, he thought, out of habit, the habit of someone who stood for serious conversations, who found that standing helped. Mr. Potter, she said. Sit down. Harry sat. She sat. She looked at him with the monocle and the calm, forensic attention of someone in her profession, the attention of a person who investigated things for a living and had learned to see past the surface of whatever was presented to her. I've read the prophet, she said. I assumed you had. I've also received the Gringotts formal notification, which arrived this morning at 8:15. Standard copy to all Wizengamot members. She folded her hands on the desk. The assessment results are valid. Gringotts does not make errors on bloodline assessments, and they would not publish false results. Their commercial credibility depends entirely on their accuracy. Anyone arguing otherwise is arguing politics, not fact. Yes, Harry said. What do you want from me? He respected the directness and met it with the same. Your vote at the Wizengamot session, he said. And any allied votes you have influence over. I'm not asking for personal loyalty or a political alliance, I'm asking you to vote for constitutional fact over political convenience. And the influence you'd have over the DMLE, she said. Under the founding charter, your authority supersedes the minister's. That includes his oversight of this department. I have no interest in directing the DMLE, Harry said. You do your job. Do it properly, without Fudge interfering with your budget or your investigations for political reasons. That's what I want from this department, not control, just the absence of obstruction. He paused. Sirius Black. She didn't flinch at the name but her attention sharpened. What about him? He never had a trial. The evidence against him was circumstantial and has since been demonstrated to be false. You have the sworn testimony of Albus Dumbledore and Remus Lupin on that, both given in the hearing 2 years ago. The case was closed without formal exoneration because Pettigrew escaped before it could be resolved. The Ministry's outstanding warrants on Sirius Black are procedural artifacts of a case that was never properly concluded. Bones was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to review the case. I'm asking you to apply the standard of evidence that you would apply to any other case, without political interference from above. If the evidence supports exoneration, and I believe it does, then process it. She looked at him steadily. That's a significant commitment to ask for in an initial meeting. You said you'd received the Gringotts notification, Harry said. You know what my legal standing is. I'm not making a request on behalf of my godfather to a government official who has no reason to listen to me. I'm asking you, on the merits, to do the right thing. Another pause. Amelia Bones had been doing the right thing in this building for a long time, Harry suspected, in rooms full of people who were doing the expedient thing in calling it right. The expression on her face told him that this was a room she recognized. "I will review the black case," she said carefully. "If the evidence supports what you say, I will process the appropriate documentation. I won't pre-commit to an outcome, because that's not how my department works, and it won't work that way on your authority either. But the review will happen." "That's all I asked for," Harry said. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, decisively. "At the Wiesengemot session, whenever Fudge calls it, my vote is for constitutional acknowledgement of the assessment. 2 aligned votes with it." She paused. "I'll also be asking pointed questions about the 6 sealed wards on your magical core and who authorized them. That's a matter of public record and magical law, not politics." "You can ask those questions," Harry said. "I won't stop you." "No," she said, with something that was almost warmth. "I don't imagine you would." He left her office at 2:15 and rode the lift back down, and in the atrium, heading toward the flue, encountered the thing he'd been hoping to avoid. Cornelius Fudge. The minister came through a set of doors from the direction of his office corridor with 2 aides and a grim expression, and stopped dead when he saw Harry. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, the freeze, the recognition, and then the expression reconfigured itself into something that was trying to be authoritative and landing closer to rattled. "Potter," Fudge said. "Minister," Harry said. They stood perhaps 10 feet apart in the atrium, and the witches and wizards moving through the space were doing the thing people did when they sensed a confrontation forming, slowing down, adjusting their trajectories, suddenly needing to be near this particular part of the atrium. Fudge stepped forward. He was a short man with a bowler hat and a manner that had always reminded Harry of someone performing authority rather than possessing it, and today that quality was sharply pronounced. The hat was slightly crooked and his color was high. "I want you to understand," Fudge said, voice low and controlled and with the faint over-precision of someone who had rehearsed this, "that whatever Gringotts has told you, whatever that article in the Prophet claims, this ministry, minister." Harry kept his voice pleasant and entirely level. "I'm not here to have this conversation in the atrium." Fudge stopped. "When the Wiesengemot session is called," Harry continued, "I'll take my seats and the body will address the assessment results through the proper process. That's the right place for this conversation. Here is not." "You don't get to tell me," Fudge began. "I'm not telling you anything," Harry said. "I'm suggesting that whatever you're about to say, you'll want to have said it in a room with a record and a legal framework, not in the atrium where someone will write down whatever they heard and it will be in tomorrow's Prophet." He met Fudge's eyes steadily. "I'm giving you the professional courtesy of that observation, not because I have to, but because it's the sensible thing." Fudge stared at him. His face had gone through several colors. One of the aides had taken a very deliberate half-step back. The thing about power, Harry had discovered somewhere in the last 24 hours, was that it changed the texture of a room. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare. It just did. The way a room felt when a teacher walked in versus when it was just students, the same room, different gravity. He hadn't done anything except stand still and speak plainly, and the atrium had done the rest. Fudge said nothing else. After a moment that lasted longer than was comfortable for everyone present except Harry, he walked toward the lifts. His aides followed. One of them looked back. Harry turned and walked to the flue. He told Sirius what had happened over a late lunch at the Leaky Cauldron, not the whole encounter, just the relevant beats, and watched Sirius eat a sandwich and look increasingly delighted. "You walked into the ministry on the day after the Prophet story," Sirius said, "secured Amelia Bones's vote, opened a case review for my exoneration, and told Fudge to his face to wait for the proper venue, all before 3 in the afternoon." "The vault visit was the morning," Harry said. "The ministry was the afternoon." "You're 16, Sirius said, as though this had just occurred to him. "Barely. I missed the Hogwarts leaving feast." Sirius looked at him across the table with the kind of expression that lived in the territory between pride and something more fundamental, the expression of a man who had been afraid, for a long time, that the things he loved were going to be destroyed before he got to see what they became. "Edmund Pendragon's letter," Harry said, pulling it from his pocket and passing it across. Left in the vault. Sirius read it slowly, then looked up. Be the thing the magic recognizes before you're the thing people have to acknowledge. I think we're almost there, Harry said. The Wisengamot session will be the acknowledgement. But the magic, he thought about the castle at Hogwarts, about the pulse he'd felt in the ancient wards, about the crown warm in his hands. The magic has been recognizing me since yesterday morning. The session will be tomorrow, Sirius said. Fudge can't delay it longer. Not after today. I know. Augusta is ready. Bones is ready. Harry drank his tea. I want to go back to the vault tomorrow morning before the session. There's something there I need. The crown. Not the crown. Not yet. He thought of the east wall. The plain hilt, the enormous age of it. The sword that Edmund had said predated all of them and had never been wrong about a threat. The sword. Sirius raised an eyebrow. There's something coming, Harry said quietly. Not alarmed, it wasn't alarm he felt. It was the ward sense again, the peripheral awareness that had been growing since yesterday, and in the last hour, since he'd walked through the ministry and stood in Fudge's suddenly charged presence, it had been saying something he was still learning to translate but whose tone he recognized. Something was moving. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Voldemort was in the background of everything, he was always in the background, that particular cold and patient presence, but it wasn't only Voldemort. It was the system itself, the network of alliances and interests that had kept the current order in place, responding to a disruption the way any system responded, with the attempt to restore equilibrium by eliminating whatever had changed. He was what had changed. I'm going to need to be ready, he said simply. Sirius looked at him across the table in the warm, firelit interior of the leaky cauldron, at the afternoon light shifting through the old windows and the comfortable noise of the pub around them, and said, then we'll be ready. Outside, across the whole of Wizarding Britain, witches and wizards were reading a story about an ancient magic finding its heir. In the ministry, a minister was having a very difficult afternoon. In Hogwarts Castle, the deep enchantments were oriented toward a boy who hadn't gone back to the Dursleys and wasn't going to. In a vault below the dragons, a crown pulsed its steady gold heartbeat, patient and entirely certain. And in a letter in Harry's inside pocket, a dead king's handwriting said, give it something worth waiting for. Harry finished his tea and thought, I intend to.